Thank you very much for that. For those of you who are not familiar with Politico exists to both produce and support journalism of consequence around politics, policy, and power. And unfortunately, today is a really important example of why we need journalism and why we need reporters covering this type of political situation that we find ourselves in, the climate. So to dive right in, I always like to start with a little taste of everyone's favorite question about what our new neighbor is like in Washington, down the street. So this is a statement that isn't a new one, and it is certainly not coming out of 2016, but it is something that is super important to focus on and remember, particularly for nonpartisan news organizations. This is a really bitter pill to swallow, that you can't fight emotions with facts. So one of the things that Politico is doing, and I'm happy to be involved with, is coming out of last year. I'll assume that everyone in the room is aware that a few things happened in 2016. We at Politico invested in and created a centralized audience insights and data team. What's exciting about this is that we actually had a lot of these people already in the organization, living within different parts of the different business units. The analysts, as well as the data itself, lives in these silos. So one of the first things that we did was bring this group together, and this was only back in February, so still fairly new, but the mission is really to get to the core understanding of what makes people tick in the realm of policy. What is it that really is motivating people? So a few of the things that we did really quickly to prove our value and get some quick wins on the board was, as I mentioned, we brought all of the analysts and the data sources into one place. This is particularly valuable for an organization like Politico that has several different businesses. We really look at we bring people together through convening, through our live events business. We have a subscription service, but it's for professionals, and it's a high dollar annual subscription to various policy verticals where you get news as soon as it's happening that is relevant to your work and your industry. The next thing that we did was our small but mighty team declared that we were going to kill the bullet points. No more handing over a list of percentages, of open rates, of email subscriber list sizes. We had to tell more of a story. Unfortunately, that's a little bit easier to do in an organization such as media, where everyone is inherently curious and is able to translate really complicated matters into stories that are understandable. As I mentioned, small but mighty team. One of the things that we did in lieu of having a massive team of researchers and analysts and data scientists was that we went into each of the different departments at the company. And then finally, we are really mapping out the customer journey, their experience across all of our different products, whether it's coming to our website, whether it's coming to our live events. And we're trying to make sure that people are not only aware of all of our offerings, but they're also engaging with all of our products and experiences. For example, if you attend our live events and don't subscribe to one of our newsletters, we're trying to be much smarter about that in the way that a consumer brand would be, in understanding, are you also subscribing to our newsletters? But then on the back end, are you engaging with them? And is there actually value in it for you? And if not, how can we create something new that does provide that value? The very first thing that we did when we formed this new team was to conduct a listening tour. And it's one of those things that always sounds, it's something that I think people check the box on, and it's a nice to have and do. I will be encouraging us to do this very regularly because it was extremely enlightening to really understand at the executive stakeholder level how data is being used, where the gaps in understanding are, and what we can do to help them completely remove that data to inaction paralysis that exists. We also found that we have to make it very clear that the data alone is not a silver bullet. It took some convincing to get a team of this nature together in the first place, and now it is often the one thing that people can't live without is the data and the insights to make their decisions. And so we have to be able to help people make that transition from being a truly gut data-driven organization to more of a data-driven organization that is gut-aided. One of the stop masking the symptoms note on here is one that I think is particularly valuable, in that we were finding that executives now were able to, again, check the box and say, we talked to the analyst, we asked them what the open rate of this newsletter is because we're thinking about killing it. I think everyone in this room realizes that it doesn't matter what the open rate of a newsletter is. If you're thinking about killing it, you will be able to quickly spin that into whatever it is that helps your argument. And so what my team is really trying to do is provide additional context about who is on that email list, who is engaging with it the most. Does it have the highest penetration in the White House? Is it the thing that regulators cannot wake up and do their jobs without reading first? A quick look at something that is very unique with Politico, in that our audience is truly our most valuable asset, but not in the traditional sense. More so looking at the fact that even just take the events this morning, those who were involved are sources to our newsroom. They're also subscribers to our pro products. They're attending our events as panelists. They're coming to newsmaker events to discuss with our reporters as a live extension of our journalism. So we have this really unique makeup of our audience where there's this overlap on who is consuming us and also who can't live without us to do their job. And then Politico Insiders, note there, is one of my personal favorites. So last fall, we created a online insights, audience insights panel. We reached out to a hand-selected group of our audience from different parts of the business and invited them to join and really help us better understand what their needs are so that we can better solve for them. What's beautiful about this is it allows us to leverage relationship memory. I used to joke that when we would send these surveys out to our clients and our customers and our consumers, we were often the equivalent of that jerk at the cocktail party who repeatedly introduces themselves over and over and over and asks what you do for a living and where do you live? And we had to get rid of that and start growing the conversation. One of the things that we're working on right now that I'm really excited about is around our super users and kind of shifting that conversation or focus from the people who need us the most to do their jobs to those who actually use us the most. And we're finding that there's not a whole lot of necessarily a whole lot of overlap between those. The reason that you see the Gatorade bottles here, I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with the birth story of Gatorade and being created as something that helps fuel and enhance the performance of the University of Florida football team. So Politico has sort of a similar tale in that the people who are inside the Beltway and who are making policy decisions or influencing those policy decisions, they still need us the most, and that's not going to change. But we have to start looking beyond that, and we've seen, especially coming out of the election, our reach has expanded across the country. It's expanded across the world. Even we've opened several bureaus in Europe. We have an entire Politico Europe publication now. We're in 6 different states covering local, state-level politics. But we have to really get into who those people are that are using us the most that might not be that professional athlete or the equivalent of in the policy sense. We're also encouraging ethnography. This one really shouldn't be that challenging in a media organization where you have a sales team that's constantly in the market talking to advertisers and sponsors, as well as a newsroom that is in the field every day talking to sources and policymakers and influencers. But what we have not done to date that we're working on is figuring out a way to systematize that and empower those people to feel that they are truly ethnographers and bring it back to us and put it into a system that allows us to really dig a little bit deeper and overlay it with hard data to make our cases and our analysis that much stronger. The third one here is connecting insights to value. This one is, again, for brands outside of media is a much easier to wrap your heads around. But what we're doing is trying to really understand what the value of these political influencers that we consider to be our most valuable asset. What is the value of them consuming our products, and where are they consuming it, and how are they consuming it? Improving data literacy, not something that is exclusively a problem in media organizations. However, it is key to really getting people to a place where they feel comfortable asking the questions that they're really trying to answer, and moving away from that, what's the open rate of X? And then asking the audience more. One of my favorite mentors when I was first getting into journalism, his advice to me was that journalists don't ride the bus enough. And I think you could insert anything over journalists, but I think the overlaying message is that we're not often getting out enough and having those conversations with people, and that's just really critical to understanding. So as I mentioned, some of the work that we're doing around our super users is shifting that conversation. And the McDonald's milkshake, again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this anecdote. McDonald's several years ago found that professionals were going in before 8 and 9 a.m. and buying milkshakes and then hitting the road and starting their commute. And that was very hard to understand in the pure data, but when they started doing observational research, they were realizing that it was helping make their commute more pleasant. And so the takeaway from this that I feel very strongly about is the notion that McDonald's wasn't actually competing with Chick-fil-A or Burger King's milkshakes. They were competing with bananas and bagels and cereal. And so trying to, in a news organization, move away from thinking that we're exclusively trying to get the breaking news alert out faster than the other news organizations, that's not really what we should be focusing on. We should be really considering what else it is in the person's day that we're competing against. For example, you get a push notification about breaking news, you could be competing with a text from your mom. And figuring out really where it is that you lie and where the value is something that I'm really excited that we're digging into. And on that note, I will end with my favorite, don't forget to thank the journalists today. And especially on days like this where the news is so hard and difficult.
Thank you, Rebecca. Do we have any questions for Rebecca?
Okay, first of all, you mentioned you have a journalism background, so thank you. And then second of all, I want to know, having worked in newsrooms myself, how was it convincing the editors and reporters to go with data and backed up by their gut instincts rather than their gut instincts right off the bat?
very challenging. And as I mentioned, we're really only a few months into this. Again, journalists are inherently curious people, and so being able to tap into that a little bit and help them understand that in the same way that they wouldn't just take one source's version of the story and go with it, they would seek out different sources and really build a stronger case that tells a better story and makes connects dots that may be seemingly unconnected. It makes it that much easier. And so I think we're using it, we're getting our footing by helping people understand just that we're there to help more than try to be their fact checkers, because nobody wants that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Do we have any other? Lenny was right, the lights are bright. I'm sorry. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting talk. One of the things I find really fascinating about fake news, or the perception of fake news and how it ties into data, is how prominent those perceptions can be. When I came into this, I was thinking about sites like Nate Silver's 538, which is like the most nerdy statistical modeling, and people are still decrying even that sort of thing as fake news if it doesn't fit in with their views. So my question for you is, coming from a news background, adopting this kind of data-driven approach, have you seen that kind of pushback, and what kind of strategies have you been able to employ to kind of fight back against it and get people to really understand the point of the data-driven approach?
Absolutely. That fake news is actually something that I put into two buckets. There's the actual fake news that's being produced in other parts of the country, world, and then there's what people are now using in the term fake news as a crutch to really lean on if they just simply disagree with it. And so we're trying to figure out ways every single day that we can beat that down. And especially in Washington, honestly, I've seen a huge uptick in people using the phrase fake news when they just don't agree with something. And so we're trying to figure out what it is that would help facilitate more of those conversations between opposing opinions, and where we can play a role in that. It's definitely a challenge and a scary one.
And I think, we're waiting for the mic, I think, Rebecca, your whole thing of those kind of opposing sides, and there were so many notes throughout your presentation of things that the insights professionals in this room can apply as well. Like, it's not. It's also, on the flip side, it's not just data. It is going back and talking to those commuters in the morning and having that conversation and bringing back, whether it's anthropology, that Grant talked about, or ethnography, or journalism approaches.
Right. Journalism and media organizations are excellent at answering the how, and answering the why always, when it comes to making business decisions, people just associate it with taking a lot more time and being more laborious, and we're having to kind of flip those perceptions.
Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. I have a love for politics and a background in politics, but now I'm in neuroscience applied to business specifically. Thank you for using the Gatorade example. How come some of these non-conscious, subconscious measurement tools aren't being used in politics to really try to understand voters the way we try to understand consumers, and to really get that depth of knowledge? Where are the biases? How much of it is happening just gut there because everybody in their family's been a Republican, so they're a Republican? I mean, trying to get at these deep-rooted things that exist in all of us. Is that something that maybe the journalists can start applying some of those techniques? Because I know when you do an interview, you're probably thinking this person is flat lying, whether they know it or not. So I've got to imagine the same problems we have on the consumer brand side that you have on politics and voting.
Absolutely. So that's a huge question, and I think that on the polling front, it's a personal pet peeve of mine that you saw headlines the world over that led with polling got it wrong, and yet we still seek out and cover stories built purely around polling. That's not my problem to tackle at the moment, but on the internally trying to get people more comfortable and more aware of the dangers of just looking at one type of source is a huge obstacle. And I have found that by bringing back anecdotes and stories from the field that I've picked up on from doing more observational research, it really goes a long way. There's a slide that I will show executives that has a picture of the most beautiful, immaculate, stunning refrigerator full of fruits and vegetables, and it's so colorful. And when you're surveying people alone, they often do, that may be their personal belief that is in describing their own shopping habits and nutrition and cleanliness of the fridge, that is what they aspire to be, so that's what they're going to select. Whereas in reality, the other image is one that is a lot messier, and it's full of frozen foods, and it's sugary beverages and fruit juices and things that people may not necessarily believe are unhealthy products, and they may not be unhealthy. But then trying to figure out the gap between why it is that they believe they're one way when the reality doesn't exactly match that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate it.
Thank you.